In this video on data collection, we're going to discuss the process of selecting samples. Let's start with a reminder about the distinction between population and sample. We always are interested in data about an entire target population, and sometimes we are fortunate enough to be able to obtain data on each individual in that target population and therefore obtain exact knowledge about that population. More often than not, it is either not practical or not even doable, and instead we collect sample data, that is, data collected on just some of the individuals in the target population. This introduces some issues, such as the fact that our conclusions about the entire target population will come with some level of uncertainty, but it also brings up the issue of how to select a sample so that we can learn anything of interest about our target population. So for that, let's start with an analogy where an archery target is our target population and the arrows are our sample data. We like to use the sample to better understand the population, in particular to find the center of the population. In this analogy, we would like to use the pattern made by just the arrows to be able to find the center of the entire archery target. So here, look at the 4 examples representing what is left, just the arrows, and use the pattern created by those arrows to guess where the center of the archery target might have been. What you probably noticed is that it is easier to guess where the center of the archery target might have been if you have more arrows, and also if the pattern is more clustered, so less variability. Which brings us to two important issues in sample data collection. One is the sample size, the amount of information collected, and the other one is the variability of the data. To some extent, variability can be compensated for by having a larger sample size. On the other hand, if the arrows missed a big chunk of the target, then your guess for where the center of that target might be is going to be way off. This brings us to a very important issue in statistics. If your sample is not representative of the entire target population, then you've introduced bias in your data and your conclusions are likely to be just way off. Understand that you can't typically tell just by looking at your sample data whether or not it is a biased representation of your target population. This means that when designing your data collection process, you must think very hard about any potential source of bias and what you can do to avoid it. So let's start with some data collection approaches that are known to come with inherent built-in biases. First is anecdotal evidence. Those represent uniquely personal cases that are unlikely to be representative of any larger target population. They are unfortunately not that uncommon. You find them typically in the form of testimonials and celebrity endorsements. Another form of biased data collection approach is the volunteer response sample, also called voluntary response sample. It is a form of data collection that is entirely open to anyone who is willing to participate without any form of restriction. And what that means is that individuals who are more motivated to participate will want to participate, and therefore the sample will not be fully representative of the target population. And more importantly, the lack of restriction means that individuals who are very motivated to participate can participate 2 or 3 times, or with the help of enough money or technology, thousands of times. Therefore, volunteer data collection is fundamentally a hugely biased data collection process. This kind of data is unfortunately quite common in the age of the internet. You have all sorts of online ratings where individuals may be paid for their ratings, tweets that can be retweeted by bots automatically, amplifying the opinions of a few over that of the entire target population. A convenience sample is a sample that uses some type of individuals because they are easier to access And because of that, it's clearly not representative of your full intended target population. So the problem here is not that your sample is not going to be representative of anything, is that it is representative of a narrower, well-defined subset of individuals than your true intended target population. So an example of that is the common use of college students in human behavioral studies. College students are human beings, but not all human beings are college students. So if you have a behavioral study that uses college students and your conclusion is that other college students might behave in the same way, then that's fine. But if you want to use that study to conclude that people in general would behave that way, then that's where the bias is introduced. So let's talk about samples that are not fundamentally biased to use a random selection process. By selecting the individuals at random, there is no systematic tendency to emphasize some individuals over others in the selection process. There are many different ways to pick a probability or random sample. The simplest form is the simple random sample, in which any sample of size n has exactly the same chance of being your ultimate sample as any other sample of size n. Sometimes you can simply have a systematic random sample where you pick every nth individual on your list or every nth individual coming to you. As long as there is no pattern in the coming and going, then systematic will be just as good as a simple random sample. Now, using probability, like in a simple random sample, does not guarantee that your sample will be an exact match to your target population. What it does guarantee is that there's a very small chance that your sample picked at random would be very unlike the target population. If you want to have better guarantees than that, you can use a process called stratification, where, for instance, you might define some subgroups in your target population that you know are represented in certain proportions. And then you can put constraints on your random sample so that it has exactly the same representation of those different subgroups. There are many more ways to design random samples. The more complicated your design is, and the more challenging your data analysis will have to be as a result. We'll focus mostly on the simple random sample. Selecting the variables you want to record is part of your data collection design, in that you need to think about it before you start collecting data. For that, it's important to consider your study's ultimate objective, its end goal, and make sure that your variable is a good fit. Understand what aspects of this goal can actually be recorded. Not everything can be objectively assessed. Decide whether you want to record your variable from a quantitative or a categorical point of view. And you will probably have to take into consideration issues of cost, speed, and accuracy. For instance, a simple measurement of body height. If your objective is to have medical records, precision is not a great issue. Speed and cost will be more important. If, on the other hand, you wish to measure the height of astronauts in space to see how weightlessness affects their skeleton, then you will definitely want to have a very accurate measurement, even if it means spending more time for it and being much more costly. You should take all of this into account when selecting a primary variable, but you may also want to pick some additional variables so that you have a full picture of the problem. This brings us to the issue of confounding variables. As a reminder, we say that two variables are confounded when their effect on a response variable cannot be distinguished, so we do not know which one really is the cause. Confounding variables are a major issue because it means that we may not be able to have clear conclusions with respect to causation, especially when we have an observational study. So when designing your study and in your data collection process, think of critical variables that could be confounding variables, and if you can, record data about them. some sort of comparison either between different groups of individuals or between different conditions that are applied on the study participants. How do we make those comparisons? There are two fundamentally different approaches. The first approach is to use independent samples. What that means is that the individuals being compared are completely unrelated, creating subsets that we call independent samples. And the implication is that any comparison we make can only be done at the group level. In contrast, we might wish to do comparisons at the individual level. That means that we will make comparisons on very clearly related individuals, sometimes so related as to be the same individual. This type of design comes with a variety of names depending on the type of study or the field, variety of names depending on the type of study or the field, names such as match pairs, repeated measures, crossover, time series. So here we have raw data tables for each of those two designs. Remember that the optimal organization for raw data is to use one row for each individual studied. Which one of those two data tables represents a design for independent samples? The data table corresponding to the independent samples is the one on the left, because we can see that for each individual, only one type or one condition is relevant and only one value is recorded. That means that if you want to compare all the individuals under conditional type A and all the individuals under conditional type B, those are going to be completely unrelated sets of individuals. In contrast, for each individual or each pair of individuals, we will have one recording under condition A and we will have another recording under condition B. That means that we'll be able to make the comparison for each individual or each pair of individuals. Being able to identify a design as being independent samples versus match pairs repeated measures is very important, in part because the actual data analysis will be radically different, mathematically speaking, for those two types of designs.